Hello, welcome again. So part of the things of going virtual is that technical difficulties happen. And so I am going to start over again. So if you heard this before, just be patient and listen again. Thank you so much. So welcome to day 2 of the Institute for Community Justice, Reentry and Healthcare Summit. I am Asada Thomas, the director at the Institute for Community Justice, and we welcome you for day 2. Today, we will explore how communities can successfully engage with the police for a successful community relationship and building. That will be done through a conversation with Dr. Jacqueline Bailey-Davis, Staff Inspector of the Philadelphia Police Department. After which we will view some art in our Art as Resistance virtual gallery, wherein we will see art done through the lens of social justice from various artists. And in our last session today, beginning at 1 o'clock, we will explore our current educational system and how it intersects with the prison complex and how the school to prison pipeline is so evident in our educational institutions. And that conversation will be facilitated by Miss Angeline Dean. Today, our host of the day is Mr. Anthony Powell. He is the Reentry Center Manager at the Institute for Community Justice, and he will be hosting the first conversation with Dr. Jacqueline Bailey-Davis. Thank you for attending today's session. Day 2, the Institute for Community Justice, Reentry, Justice, and Healthcare Summit. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Asada. I appreciate it. And again, my name is Anthony Powell, the Reentry Center Manager with the Institute for Community Justice. And again, welcome to day 2 of our event. The Justice, Reentry, and Healthcare Summit is off to a great start. Once again, day 2. Today's event and theme is Imagine. And guided by professionals in the field, we will imagine how the role of the police, as well as the system of education in the United States, can be drastically and dramatically changed in order to actually improve our communities. It will be an exciting and informative day, so sit back, relax, and enjoy today's festivities. It is indeed an honor and a pleasure to introduce a phenomenal woman who is an icon and a legend in police and criminal justice reform, Dr. Jacqueline Bailey-Davis, Staff Inspector for the Philadelphia Police Department. Dr. Bailey-Davis is a native Philadelphian who recently earned a Doctor of Public Administration degree from Westchester University, while also serving as a full-time inspector with the Philadelphia Police Department. Her dissertation entitled An Analysis of Complaints Against Police in Philadelphia, a Case for Social Equity and Collaborative Governance in Police Reform, underscored racial disparities of complainants who sustaining allegations against officers in a department which has operated in an autonomous, vertical, and closed system of investigations for more than 2 centuries. During her 23-year tenure in the Philadelphia Police Department, Bailey-Davis rose through the rank and file while working in the patrol, investigations, and training bureaus. In 2015, former Philadelphia Police Commissioner Charles H. Ramsey appointed Bailey-Davis to oversee the Department of Justice Collaborative Reform Initiative, which garnered national praise in police reform. In addition to her duties, Bailey-Davis simultaneously served a continued 12 years in academia as an adjunct and criminal justice coordinator and behavior health administrator at both Alvernian University and the Community College of Philadelphia. Bailey-Davis has honored her lifelong public service commitment via philanthropy by providing underserved Philadelphians and Cincinnatians with educational and vocational endowments to level the playing field of access and opportunity. Today's topic that you will have the opportunity to hear from Dr. Bailey is evolving Philadelphia police and community relations from fragility to forgiveness by the utilization of the ABC model, an essential but not elementary task. I welcome you and introduce you to Dr. Jacqueline Bailey-Davis.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Powell. Hello, everyone. Hola, abaragani, annyeonghaseyo. My name is Dr. Jacqueline Bailey-Davis. It is a pleasure to be here today. I would like to first thank Ms. Asada Thomas, the Executive Director of the Institute for Community Justice, for including me in such a special occasion. I thank you very much. I do have a PowerPoint presentation that I will be presenting to you, and it is in depth as far as the history of the police department along with the Black community relations. So without further ado, I will get started. Evolving Philadelphia police and community relations, in particular the Black community, from fragility to forgiveness by the utilization of the ABC model, an essential but not elementary task. On a personal and professional note, police and Black community relations has been an integral part of my 50-year existence. As a young, poor Black girl, I was born and bred here in the city of Philadelphia by way of Passyunk Homes projects, as it were Philadelphia's largest, poorest, and most isolated housing projects in the city of Philadelphia. I lived in Passyunk Homes with my family. We had a strong faith in God, and it was through my faith and my family that I had the best future that I could possibly have with my village. I attended public school systems in Philadelphia. In particular, my first experience or encounter with police officers was when I was a child, about 6 or 7 years of age. I went to a movie theater with my stepsisters and brothers, and I became lost. And I walked out of the movie theater, I saw a police officer. And I remember this police officer was a tall white man in uniform, and I walked over to him and I said, "Excuse me, I need help, I'm lost." So the officer did in fact get me back home safe and sound to my family. I could never understand the level of disrespect and disdain that people had for police, because even as a child and even into my adulthood as a civilian, I've always had positive encounters with police. After attending the Philadelphia public school systems, I graduated from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. High School, King Cougars, and I proceeded to the University of Cincinnati as a criminal justice major. That was 33 years ago. And for 33 years of my life, I have studied criminal justice, education, and public administration. I have taken my education as a student, as a scholar, as well as an adjunct and a practitioner in the criminal justice field, in particular law enforcement. And I've decided that this is going to be my lifelong purpose, which is to bring the police and the Black community together. The reason I focus on the Black community is because you have to understand something, that all communities are not created equal. All communities do not receive equal treatment. And that was an issue for me. And I actually was very ignorant to the history of my own city and my police department until I was a sophomore at the University of Cincinnati taking a course entitled The Law in Black People. I could not dispute nor refute what the professor said regarding the city of Philadelphia, in particular, my police department being the most corrupt in the nation. Unfortunately, there was some truth to that, to those statements. And lastly, I did do my dissertation on an analysis of complaints against police. Although I'm a researcher, I'm more of a practitioner. I believe that I should work on fixing problems that currently exist within the criminal justice system. I often hear people talk about reforming the criminal justice system, and I think you need to transform the system, because you have to understand that the three, I will say, American blueprints, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of the United States, and the Pledge of Allegiance, all excluded Black folks. So therefore, I need to move forward and to make sure that police and Black community relations move forward from fragility to forgiveness to moving forward with the intended purpose. And the intended purpose is for the police to serve in a fiduciary role to protect, serve, and honor their community members. And in turn, the community members must support the police in assisting them in doing their job. As a quick overview, I will talk about the who, the Philadelphia Police Department, and the Black community. I will discuss the fragility and forgiveness, that's the what. I will discuss the why. I would like to address social issues that divide, devalue, dehumanize, and destroys humanity. Also the where, Philadelphia and beyond, the when, the past and the present, and the future, and the how the utilization of my ABC model should be utilized as a preamble to developing policies and strategies when talking about moving from fragility to forgiveness and moving forward. Why is the role of the police arguably the most important in the Black community and the criminal justice system? Well, let's take a look. Police are usually the gatekeepers of the criminal justice system. Police are usually the first individuals that accused offenders come into contact with. Police officers make the most important decisions about what happens to the accused offenders. We have one of the biggest tools in our toolboxes, and that's the use of discretion. Discretion leads to the ability to take someone's liberty or to give someone some liberty. Police also initiate the alleged offender's process or journey throughout the criminal justice system. In addition, the police have the most influence on the day-to-day lives of the community. I can tell you when I graduated from the police academy and I was assigned to the 14th district, I resided in the 35th district at the time, so I knew a little bit about the area. And I can tell you that most community members were very friendly towards the police at that time. And we had wonderful relations, and things changed depending upon an issue that whether it happened in Philadelphia or whether it happened in Los Angeles or New York, the relationship did change. Also, the community observes the police more than any other criminal justice practitioner. During my 23 years tenure with the police department, I decided to become an adjunct professor to teach criminal justice because I realized that if I had an opportunity to interface with young Black and brown and white folks who wanted to learn about criminal justice and be police officers, correctional officers, judge, probation, and parole, et cetera, I wanted to make sure that they knew that they had to always serve with honor and integrity in order to keep the criminal justice system moving in the direction it needed to be moved in. Also, the police are observed by the Black community as being the alpha of oppressors. We are the first individuals that they come into contact with. Then when you look at the criminal justice system, there are three main areas: police, courts, and corrections. And when you look at all three of those areas, you will see that Black people in particular have been the most oppressed and the most impacted by this system. So with regard to the police, Blacks are disproportionately stopped, frisked, searched, arrested compared to the other groups. When you look at the Department of Justice Collaborative Reform Technical Assistance publication that they did on the police department of deadly shootings, of deadly encounters, they noted that in officer-involved shootings in Philadelphia, 80% of the individuals shot were Black versus 20% being white. In addition, when you look at the court systems, Blacks are disproportionately receiving longer sentences compared to other groups. Blacks receive 10% longer sentences than whites in the state system, and nearly 20% of a longer sentence at the federal level. In the corrections system, Blacks disproportionately are represented in jails and or prisons. In an individual's lifetime who is white, in particular a white male, they have a 1 in 17 chance of going to jail and or prison. When you look at Blacks, those numbers are staggeringly different. 1 in 3 Black males will be in jail or prison. And lastly, when I think about the case of Khalif Browder, it was a 16-year-old young black man in 2010 in New York. Khalif Browder was arrested for allegedly stealing a book bag. He spent 3 years of his life on Rikers Island. He was finally released, although he had never been charged nor convicted. He was finally released in 2015, and there's currently a documentary on Netflix that tells you the story of his life, that when he came home in 2015, he committed suicide at his home. That is the one story. No matter all the stories that I hear about individuals being oppressed and being assassinated, if you will, by the system, even at their own hands, that is the story that rips through my soul, because I have a 23-year-old son who actually happens to be my cousin. He's my cousin and my son. I adopted him. And every time I look at pictures of Khalif Browder, he has the exact same eyes as my son. So I use that passion that I feel about Khalif Browder's life, that his life mattered, in helping to transform the criminal justice system. I would like to talk about the historical context of the Philadelphia Police Department and the Black community, to talk about fragility through the community lenses. And I did add a lot more script than I normally would, because if this PowerPoint presentation is going to be published, individuals can have the information readily at hand and they can utilize it at their leisure. In the 16 to 1700s, in the city of Philadelphia, there were constables appointed to regulate leisure activities. They would regulate dice games and cockfighting events. There were also common communities that hired night watch to carry a bell to warn constables of criminal activity. It was a very informal system. But in 1751, the Philadelphia Police Department was established with constables and night watches. They were first paid wages. They first received their paid wages, and then you had Stephen Girard, who bequeathed money to expand the day police and the night watchmen. In the 1830s to the 1940s, that was the industrial era. They clashed between the Protestants and the Irish Catholics over jobs. So then you had the Pennsylvania Constitution, which disenfranchised blacks. The abolitionist meeting hall was actually bombed and burned down. In the 1950s, the city and the county jurisdictions decided to consolidate into one government. The PPD had 829 patrolmen. They wore uniforms and they had professional standards. That was 1829. That was in the 1800s. In 1884 to 1896, the first black police officer and 60 black police officers were hired, but the police department still was dominated by whites on the force, and they harassed minorities. When you look at 1903, Lincoln Steffens, who was a muckraker, a journalist, he described the city of Philadelphia by way of the police department as being the most corrupt and contented city in the country. In 1926, police saw blacks as an easy prey for illegal arrests and target practice. You heard me correctly, target practice. At one particular time in the 1900s, black males were used or considered as target practice for police officers. There was a survey of criminal activity in Philadelphia, and the black male population was about 2.7%, which was 67,000 out of 1 million constituents. And with that being said, they represented 20% of the arrests. Also, in 1945 to 1960, there was a writer by the name of Carl Johnson. He wrote as he researched an article entitled Police and Black Community Relations Post-War in Philadelphia, Race and Criminalization in Urban Social Spaces. I bring this article to you is because there's a lot of resemblance in what he's talking about urban spaces when we talk about individuals being stopped and frisked. Race riots instigated by white teens who actually went to Bartram High School towards black teens who attended Tilden High School. Only the black teens were arrested until the black adults protested. 1940-1950, the Philadelphia black population rose from 13% to 18%. When you talk about the fragility through the community lenses, I want to talk about the race conflict that led the restriction of blacks. Blacks had their social movements and spaces restricted from them. The whites were threatened with violence. Whites actually threatened the black individuals with violence. The whites' negative stereotypes and fear of blacks competing for jobs and housing made it most susceptible for white police to abandon their laws and to use incarceration to control black people. In the beginning of the modern post-war, criminalization which preceded Philadelphia's prison industry complex indicated that blacks were warehoused by the thousands. Whites and blacks viewed police as outcasts and criminals. Cops believed that black social movement was a criminal act. Police disregarded the laws. They encouraged de facto segregation. They contributed to racial misunderstanding and limited blacks and whites from protesting racial harmony when issues arise. The police intervened between blacks and whites, and discriminatory practices eroded the black community's confidence in the police. The police protections for all classes of blacks was minimal, and the small number of black cops could not arrest whites who committed crimes against blacks. Other cities, Chicago, Atlanta, Detroit, with large numbers of blacks faced the same issues, which were not new. In 1950, there was a survey by Gordon Brown. Mr. Brown found that the black community faced racial prejudice by police. Blacks' concerns were dismissed by the police. The police attitudes towards blacks, they were innate criminals. They thought blacks, they disregarded black on black crime, and there was illegal drug flow in the community, and no one was arrested in terms of a kingpin. They would always arrest the low-level offenders. In 1950, Irvin Miller, a black male, was found dead in his cell at the house of detention. Police leaders protested prison practice of segregation, and there were no black correctional officers. The historical context continues where white officers sided with white residents to reinforce segregation in schools, housing, and the use of public facilities. No police protection for blacks. The Black Community Assistance came from the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP. Johnson described the heavy-handed tactics and tough tactics of Inspector Frank Rizzo against the black community members. The tactics remained while Rizzo was the mayor and the police commissioner. In the 1940s to the 1950s, black leaders, white reformers, black churches, and fraternal organizations helped to reduce crime amongst teenagers, but the police continued to harass law-abiding blacks. From the 1960s to the 1970s, black power movements for black freedom in Philadelphia. You had the Church of the Advocate, the Black Panther movement, Black United Liberation Front, Student Nonviolence Coordination Committee. They fought for economic equality, education equity, improved living conditions, and to end police brutality. In 1964, you had race riots where there was Ruth and Odessa Bradford versus two police officers during a traffic stop in which the police officers used some heavy-handed tactics towards Miss Bradford. So the black activism and military alarm, the PPD raided the homes of Black Panther leaders and their Black Panthers headquarters. The FBI tracked these black activists. In 1970, a white police officer was killed by a black man. The police raided the Panther headquarters. The Panthers were stripped, searched in public, and bail was set at $100,000. There are two portraits here where you see that their race riots took place in 1964, where they actually dismantled sections of North Philadelphia, whom to this day have not recovered. Also, you see pictures of police officers having Black Panther members aligned against the wall, stripped down to their undergarments. The historical context continues the fragility through the community lenses. In the 1980s, we had controversial arrest and conviction of Mumia Abu-Jamal for killing police officer Daniel Faulkner. In 1985, you had the move a Black liberation group. A police helicopter dropped a bomb on row houses on a row home that killed 11 MOVE members, including 5 children. In the 1990s, the 39th District police scandal rocked Philadelphia with police corruption and brutality of residents in North Philadelphia. From the 2000s to the present, we have the Bailey versus City of Philadelphia, which is a court-monitored reporting of stop and frisk, as Blacks have been overrepresented and being disproportionately stopped more than other groups. From 2009 to 2013, civil lawsuits for officer-involved shootings have cost the city $11.6 million total, $4 million for one complainant and $2.5 million for another complainant. From 2010 to 2019, Philadelphia has paid nearly $40 million for malicious prosecution, false arrests, false imprisonment, and overturned convictions. Here you will see pictures recently of the community saying they've had enough. No justice, no peace. You have individuals calling for the defunding of police. You have individuals saying that Black Lives Matter, all while police have to protect and secure them. When you look at the historical context of police and Black community in terms of the fragility from the police perspective, meaning the subculture of police lenses, you have individuals who believe, as law enforcement officers, that they are agents of the government who maintain law and order and detect and prevent crime. The organizational and/or individual beliefs that Blacks were or are responsible for crime. Blacks exhibit violent and predatory behaviors who were or are a threat to police and to society. White residents need protection from Blacks. There are police policies, local, state, and federal laws support more enforcement on Blacks than other groups to combat crime and violence. Police are targeted based upon past and present brutality, corruption, bias-based policing, and police impunity. Police officers sacrifice their lives to protect and serve. And there is police reform in the areas of police accountability, training, diversity, inclusion, and equity, and anti-racism. This is what happens when fragility leads to fatality. I'm going to say all of their names. Police Officer Laretha Baird, Police Officer Chuck Cassidy, Police Officer Isabella Nazaro, Police Officer Moses Walker Jr., Sergeant Robert Wilson III, Corporal James O'Connor, Mr. Trayvon Martin, Mr. Tamir Rice, Mr. Danroy Henry Jr., Mr. John Crawford III, Miss Breonna Taylor, and Mr. George Floyd. We have the unchecked fragility. We have the unchecked fragility and fractured relations because they manifest themselves into these fatalities for police and civilians. The unchecked fragility emanates from these offenders, these killers, because they have a disregard for the sanctity of life. Evolving police and community relations from fragility to forgiveness to moving forward must begin with the basic mindset of reciprocating humanity. I will tell you that in my 23 years of being on this department, one of the best days that I've had the opportunity to serve the community is when, 2 days, as a matter of fact, anytime a police officer is killed and I'm in uniform, I've always had someone say to me, "Officer, I'm so sorry for your loss. That was terrible what they did to that officer. They should pay for what they did for that officer." That individual and those individuals respected the sanctity of life. They respected the life of that police officer. So on the flip side, when you see individuals, Black, brown, white, polka dot stripe, whatever. When you see those individuals out marching because they feel that that community member who lost their lives and that their lives mattered, we need to reciprocate that. So if someone asks me, take a knee, I'll take a knee, pump a fist, do what I have to do to show that solidarity, because that's what it's all about, the solidarity and reciprocating humanity. All lives do matter, but the reason why we tell you Black Lives Matter is because based upon 3 of America's foundational premises and foundational works of our blueprints, they have said time and time again that we do not matter, and we do. Next, I have PPD and community engagement based upon police officers extending olive branches for forgiveness. In 1947, you had the Police Athletic League, which established to build positive relations between the youth, the area that the youth lived in, as well as with the police. In 1957 to 1968, there were civilian review boards. Those civilian review boards were to assist in implementation of policies and procedures and to hold police accountable. But then they were actually disbanded until 1993 when Mayor Rendell brought them back. 1967 in the 23rd District, there was a training facility for boxers for the Police Athletic League, and you had individual boxers, famous boxers such as Joe Frazier, who trained at that Powell Center. Commissioner Frank Rizzo, to many surprise, actually highly supported the Police Athletic League. The motto, Cops Helping Kids. The program extended from athletics to literacy assistance and to mentoring. In 1969 to the present, the Philadelphia Police Department has assisted in Operation Thanksgiving. The PPD had collected in donations $13,000 to feed 450 family members. In the 1970s, the Philadelphia Police Department's community Christmas celebration, we have a Toys for Tots drive. And I actually shared some photos with you. As you can see to the right, you see Joe Frazier in one picture being pictured there at the Police Athletic League. You have also a police officer helping a young lady with the science project. And also you have a former captain of the 19th District delivering a Thanksgiving Day food basket. And then you have one of my favorite districts where I was a sergeant in the 35th District. I will tell you, Northwest Division, not to slight any other division, I have to give you a shout out because I've spent my whole entire career in Northwest Division, and they love serving their community as well as the other officers. Also, PPD and Black community engagement, also additional olive branches being extended through the Police Explorers Civilian Police Academy programs. We have a CHEERS program, Community Health Empowerment Education Resource Services, which is extended to individuals from the ages, I believe, of 8 to 17 years of age. It's a Saturday program for about 5 weeks where they are mentored by police officers. Then you have the DARE program, the Heads Up program, which teaches individuals about gangs and drugs awareness to stay away from drugs. You have the Philadelphia Police Department accreditation. We actually were accredited twice so far from the Pennsylvania Law Enforcement Accreditation Commission, as well as the Department of Justice giving us the thumbs up for implementing our 91 recommendations as prescribed by the Department of Justice. Also, we had a program called Turning a New Corner in West Philadelphia to help individuals who were reentering into society or just individuals who needed employment. They would actually have those business persons come to the location to meet with individuals on the corner right there on the spot to have a job interview. Also, you have initiatives such as Coffee with a Cop, you have karaoke with a cop, playing basketball tournaments with police officers, Black Lives Matter to the police. And also, when you think about all of these olive branches, you still have to think that the fragility still exists. And you ask yourself, why did the fragility exist? Because the olive branches, and the community believes that these olive branches, while positive and while helpful to the community, are more performative than they are substantive. These olive branches are also, that should be extended in more critical areas. I normally attend every police advisory community meeting, and I can hear the frustration of the community members who believe that they need to have more say in police operations, specifically if we're talking about bringing police and community together. Utilization of the ABC model as a preamble to developing policies and strategies. Whenever you're developing policies and strategies to address social issues, whether it's gun violence, reduction of crime, police and community engagement or relations, you should have a preamble. There should be some preparation and some protocol with putting together those policies and those strategies. And I've found for at least the past 25 years of my life of implementing this ABC model, which A is authentic discourse and engagement. There must be real and honest conversation between all stakeholders involved. Everyone who's involved must have a say. And these stakeholders come together speaking honestly, speaking forthright about assessing the determinants and the correlates of these particular issues. B, behavior modifications, arguably the most difficult to accomplish because most people don't like change. So with the behavior modification, it requires self-reflection, the willingness to change, and accountability. C, the collaborative governance approach. The collaborative governance approach means that you have multiple active stakeholders working together to resolve issues that are unsolved independently. For anyone who thinks that the Philadelphia Police or any other police department can resolve issues such as gun violence and the elevated levels of officer-involved shootings by themselves is sadly mistaken. So when you look at this ABC model, let's talk about the significance of the model. When you have the inclusion, the consistency, and the sustainability of each concept, you will produce better results in identifying and addressing social issues. Deficiencies in policies and strategies results from either the absence of one or more of the concepts, and most likely it's the authentic discourse, but not always. Failure to utilize this model will result in working harder, not smarter. For example, you will duplicate your efforts. You will also continue to create a distrust in the department, and you will also continue the division between the police and the Black community. The model can be used to address universal issues. Now, let's talk about the review of PPD and Black community issues and where there was a lack of the ABC model. For example, I talked earlier briefly about stop and frisk, Bailey versus the city of Philadelphia. Mahari Bailey was an attorney, or is an attorney, and he had been stopped 8 times in his view, in his professional opinion, and also was found to be true. He was stopped 8 times unlawfully. So he decided to take action, he and some other individuals. So they took the action, and the action in turn, legal action in turn, that the Philadelphia Police Department is now court monitored with regard to the stop and frisk. We call them pedestrian investigations. So here's a scenario. You have unconstitutional stops and frisks, Blacks being disproportionately stopped and frisked, and you had unlawful stops and frisks occur in all areas. So when you read media outlets regarding these court monitor reports for the past 8 or 9 years now, the reports continue to say, while the number of stops have reduced, the reason for the stops continue to be unconstitutional. So initially, when you look at authentic discourse and engagement, the city actually denied that there were racial disparities and or bias in the stop and frisk. We no longer deny that. B, for the behavior modifications, although the number of stops and frisks declined, the unlawfulness persisted. That's a flaw. But C, the city has worked with multiple stakeholders to rectify that issue. So in this example, the authentic discourse and engagement and the behavior modifications deterred the city from having better results with the stop and frisk. When you look at police and community relations being fractured, as I told you, whenever I attend meetings, in particular the police advisory commission meetings, the meetings are often filled with recriminations, whereas the police will sometimes blame the community and the community will blame the police. That's problematic. They also talk about a lack of police transparency and accountability. Also, the voice of the community via the Police Advisory Commission lacks power and resources. So when you look at the ABC side of things, although we have the 21st Century Policing Task Force initiative, I can say that there was a failure to address the harm. In the 21st Century Policing model, one of the first things that they tell police department leaders to do is to acknowledge the harm that you've brought to the community. Also, police non-enforcement activities was an issue because they said that the police often had non-enforcement activities with maybe youth or those who are warm and fuzzy to the police, but other communities were often left out, such as the reentry community. Also, collaborations were compromised because of the vertical interactions and relationships. As long as you have a steadiness of vertical relations, meaning the authority goes from up to down or top to bottom and not across horizontally, things will always be problematic. Let's see how police and Black community relation issues, there was some success with the use of the ABC model. We talk about building police relations, police and community relations. We talk about having daily encounters with the community at large, being positive. So for example, I'm going to use the criminal registration process. Criminal registration process is that at police headquarters, individuals come to the police headquarters Monday through Friday around 6 a.m. in the morning, and they all stand in line for their criminal registration process. The police are informed that they need to, of course, be polite, courteous, and respectful during the encounters. The PPD behavior must promote a positive outlook on the police as a whole, and also to ensure that all police understand that we need to work together and treat people like the human beings that they are, and to respect them. I can tell you that in terms of the authentic discourse and engagement, I personally explain the process and answer questions to those individuals who are standing outside every morning for their criminal registration. Just a simple, hello, how are you? Good morning, kings and queens, how are you feeling today? I could tell that that in and of itself would lift the spirits of those individuals. And I've had people say to me, I can't believe you spoke to me. And I would say, well, why not? They said, because most police officers walk by us as if we're invisible. B, the behavior modification. There are times where individuals would stand outside in the cold. They would stand outside when there was enormous heat. And I would tell the officers, you are not allowed to have individuals stand outside in inclement weather, have them come inside. You have to think, if it's 20 degrees outside, people don't have animals sitting outside. So why would you have individual human beings standing outside? C, collaborative governance. The police department personnel would provide designated resources and information for these individuals who came to do criminal registration. Many individuals who came to do criminal registration may have not had proper identification, and the Philadelphia Police Department has developed 70 resources, whether they were free or low cost, to provide to these individuals for their assistance. That's how the ABC model worked for that particular situation with criminal registration. Second example I want to give to you is building partnerships with all groups. I was attending a community meeting and I met Ms. Asada Thomas, the executive director of ICJ. And during our conversation, she said, I would like for you to visit the Man Up program. So when you look at building partnerships with all groups, the police have discourse with reentry groups The police participate with other organizations for partnerships, Black Male Engagement, Institute for Community Justice. Also, the police partner with the above to combat crime. When I had my visit at Man Up, it was really interesting and enlightening because I went to SCI Phoenix Prison. I was in full police regalia. When I came there, I was actually checked in. I was searched just as anyone else would be searched. And I had a correctional officer escort myself and the Honorable Stephanie Sawyer and two other visitors to an area where the inmates were located. So in my encounter, the officer put us in a room, locked the room, and there were about 300 to 400 men in this room, no correctional officers. And this is a maximum security prison. I sat down at a table next to Judge Sawyer, and there was this gentleman by the name of Mr. Tyree Wallace. He's actually one of the co-founders of the Man Up program. He came out. I was impressed by his leadership, his command presence, and the ability to keep individuals disciplined. He actually provided everyone with the rules of engagement, and he stood in the center of the room as if he were any college professor, and if that was the average lecture hall. And we sat and we listened to stories after stories after stories. So I had an opportunity to speak with them. I shared my personal experiences and professional experiences with the inmates, and they shared some of their stories with me and the judge and the other visitors. So that's the authentic engagement and discourse. It's easy to converse and have a relationship or an engagement with people who are warm and fuzzy towards you. But it's a different story when you have to work with those individuals who may not feel so warm and fuzzy about you based upon their history or what they think you represent. Secondly, the behavior modifications, I identify behavior modifications through determinants and solutions. These men said to me, now that you all have a new police commissioner, we would all like to partner with the police department, with yourself, because we have a plan to assist with the gun violence and the crime in the city of Philadelphia. And lastly, the collaborative governance. Prior to COVID, myself and the men at Man Up were working together, putting plans together, strategies, because guess what? We only know one aspect, but when you have these individuals who are incarcerated, who understand the layout of the community, they understand and they actually have influence over the community to be able to, as they say, shot callers, to tell individuals in a specific area, please shut that down, things get shut down. So I'm actually happy that after I visited with the Man Up program, about 3 days later, I was coming to work at police headquarters, and I was exiting my vehicle, and there was a gentleman standing in line, and he said, "Excuse me, ma'am." I said, "Sir, you talking to me?" He said, "Yes." "Weren't you at Man Up?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "I was just there. I was just released a couple of days ago." And I said, "Well, come on inside. Everybody come inside, and let me give you some information about identification, learning, getting a job, some resources. If you had to take any courses, let me provide you with some information." That's the successful use of the ABC model. Closing remarks. The keys to evolving police and community relations via an ABC model. We've talked about authentic discourse and engagement. All you have to do is simply reciprocate humanity. That's just one small thing. Behavior modifications. There needs to be a paradigm shift from the process-driven to the people-oriented focus. So many times people say to me, police officers treat us as if we're not human, as if next, they don't want to hear from us, they don't want to talk to us. So we need to be able to focus on a people-oriented process as opposed to a process-driven focus, if you will. Collaborative governance. Criminal justice practitioners and community stakeholders need to work together. The decision-making holders should first respond to the voices of the people to avoid violence. Remember, it's the voice, listen to the voice to avoid the violence. Thank you. Here are the references.
So good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Anthony Powell, and if you're just tuning in, welcome again to the ICJ Reentry, Justice, and Healthcare Virtual Summit. I'm your host for the day, and if you're just tuning in, or if you didn't tune in at the beginning, you were listening to our opening workshop presenter, Dr. Jacqueline Bailey-Davis, who is the staff inspector for the Philadelphia Police Department. Her topic this morning, again, was evolving Philadelphia police and community relations from fragility to forgiveness by the utilization of the ABC model, an essential but not elementary task. Thank you, Dr. Bailey. We have, unfortunately, due to the interest of time, we will not host a Q&A session. However, we will present Dr. Bailey with 3 poll questions that we will task her to answer for us today. Starting with the first question, Dr. Bailey, how do you reconcile being an African American woman and a police officer in today's racial anti-police society?
Well, that's a very good question. I will tell you, for myself personally, from my personal journey, there's really nothing for me personally to reconcile, because for the past 23 years being with the Philadelphia Police Department, when I took the oath to protect and serve, I also gave myself a personal motto that I will live and give like a hero every day. And the HERO is the acronym HERO. I will always exhibit humanity towards everyone. I will ensure to provide equity. I will also ensure that I respect everyone, as well as be objective in my job. I can most certainly tell you that one way to reconcile, if you are a African American and a police officer, or a police officer just towards the community, to reconcile, I would say that although I'm a firm believer in the law enforcement code of ethics, I believe that there should be an incorporation of the ASPA code of ethics, which is the American Society for Public Administration. You hear police officers say quite frequently, and the community say, you're a public servant, you're a public servant. And the code of ethics for law enforcement is not totally different, but there's a drastic difference. So in the ASPA code of ethics, it tells you, 1, you should advance the public's interests, 2, uphold the Constitution of the law, also promote democratic participation, strengthen social equity, fully inform and advise individuals, demonstrate personal integrity, and promote ethical organizations and advance professional excellence. I think that would, in and of itself, bring the fragility to forgiveness to moving forward with the intended mission that we have, is for the police to serve in that fiduciary role, to protect and serve the citizens with integrity and transparency and accountability, and then I'm sure that the community will be on board fully.
Thank you, Dr. Bailey.
You're
Davis,
welcome.
appreciate it. The second question that was sent to us is, with the current call to defund the police, instead of taking money from the Philadelphia Police Department, do you believe the monies can be better redirected to help ensure a successful use of your ABC model, therefore using funds to help create a what could possibly be more of a community policing program?
Well, that's an interesting question as well. Let me say this much in terms of the ABC model. The actual baseline criteria, the standards for using the ABC model, is cost-free. What does it cost an individual to speak real and to speak honest about the actual issue when you're trying to either speak about an issue or you're trying to identify an issue? What is the cost of you changing your behavior, whether you know that you are involved in bias-based policing is to change your mindset. You'll change your mindset when the accountability kicks in, and see what is the cost of working together when you make a pact with the community, all communities, whether it's ICJ, reentry, juvenile agencies. There's really no cost there. The cost actually occurs when there's a resource that needs to be in place, such as a new police facility. For example, a few years ago, the Philadelphia Police Department had to get a new police academy because our police academy was not up to par. And so Commissioner Ramsey and his executive team, along with other individuals, saw to it that we had a up-to-date and more modernized police academy. That's when you would actually incur costs. But the actual baseline criteria of this model, just to use even at its essential state, does not require monetary efforts.
Awesome. That is awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it.
welcome.
Our third poll question is, when speaking of fragility in the policing community, do you believe this has increased or decreased over the course of time, or has there been no change and it is just something we are seeing more due to an international 24-hour media cycle?
I'm going to say that is a question that's probably best answered from a survey's perspective and not necessarily an anecdotal response. But I will say, if you look at Pew Research, Pew Research actually had police attitudes and study, and they said that 92% of white officers compared to 29% of black officers believe that the black community receives equitable services. So that in and of itself would lead me to believe that there is some issues, there's some fragility within. I can honestly say to you that I think one of the biggest mishaps is, for me, is when you're trying to be authentic and having that honest conversation and dialogue. I think it's difficult within the city of Philadelphia in terms of the police department. I'm a person who doesn't shy away from difficult conversations, so I'll just say this in conclusion. I believe in having conversations that need to be had. I can remember one day being in my office, and I left my office and I had a conversation with someone. And in that conversation, they asked me what was I up to, and I said that I was reading a book. And the book was entitled White Rage by Dr. Carol Anderson. And I explained to that person, who was a white male, I explained to him that white rage was not visible violence, but it was this violence that emanated through the system, and it impacted blacks. And a trigger for white rage was black advancement. And so initially he says, I don't believe that. I think that's weird. I think it's crazy. I'm a little offended by that. And I said, it's not for you to be offended by. It's just me sharing with you. And I think before we can actually work out police and community relations, we have to work on our own relations internally. There are folks who cannot handle an individual who is forthright, who has no problem with having honest discussions. I have a picture in my office of Coretta Scott King, Michelle Obama, and Dr. Betty Shabazz. And one of my coworkers, who was a black person, said to me, they're going to think you're radical with that picture in your office. And I said, well, if someone wants to have a picture of JFK or another president or whomever in their office, I'm not going to think anything of them other than those are human beings who try to forward the black community in getting the equity that they deserve. So I think before we can actually make some inroads, if you will, or make some progress with the community, I think there are some things that we have to deal with internally first.
Thank you, Dr. Bailey-Davis.
You're
I
welcome.
appreciate it. We want to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Bailey-Davis
You're welcome.
for an astounding and such a comprehensive presentation of the overview of her ABC model and the evolving of the Philadelphia police and community relations from fragility to forgiveness. Hopefully this presentation was definitely a call to action for you at an opportune time when social justice and racial disparity is such a colossal issue, not only in the city of Philadelphia, but in our very United States of America. We hope that you were enlightened and educated by Dr. Bailey-Davis' presentation today, and hope that you were moved by her knowledge and her passion for the great work that she has been doing as a legend and an icon in police and criminal justice reform. Thank you again, Dr. Bailey-Davis, for joining us for today's day 2 of Imagine. The next thing on our agenda is you will hear from our host, Marlon McAllister, who is our reentry specialist and digital literacy instructor, who will host our next segment of Art as Resistance. We want to also invite you to ICJ and take advantage of our reentry services during our pivotal time of this particular pandemic. Taking advantage of our healthcare and behavioral health services, workforce development, employment and training, of course, our Man Up, mentoring and peer support, and many of the reentry programs that we are offering both virtually and soon to be in person again, anger management, family reunification, parenting, and digital literacy. So without further ado, we will shift our focus on our Art as Resistance and bring to you Marlon McAllister.